What's up everybody, Matt Maran here for another car review. This is the 2023 Acura Integra. So about the all-new Integra here. Well, it's been a long time since Acura has offered an Integra here in the United States, and it's just so cool to see this vehicle come back and come back in a fresh new way. You know, it has a couple tiny little retro touches to it, but overall it's just, you know, really sharp. It just really fits in nicely with the rest of the Acura lineup. It kind of looks like a baby TLX there in the front with just how sharp it looks, and just looks really good. So the Integra has changed, obviously. So previously, you know, 15-20 years ago, whenever two-door coupes used to be a common thing on the road, you know, this was offered in multiple different body styles. Now you can only get it here in four-door hatchback configuration. There is no other sedan, there's no two-door, and that's just the realities of the world we live in today, you know, where practicality reigns supreme. And honestly, even sedans are hard to come by these days, with everyone wanting to sit up, you know, 10 feet in the air. So I mean, I think the fact that we even have this vehicle is awesome, even if it only is coming in this four-door hatchback shape. And I mean, it gives you great practicality, as well as giving you still really good looks and really great car driving dynamics, so you don't have any sacrifice there. But anyway, so up front there, you'll see the multi-LED headlights, which look really sharp. And this one here, being the A-Spec, gives you the black accents. So you'll see that you have that around the grille, the lower front bumper there, and even coming down to the sides and the back, you'll see some black accents as well. But, you know, really nice, bold grille. I really like the way it comes to a point, and also just how wide it looks up front here. It really has an imposing stance, especially compared to most of the other competitors, which are a lot boxier. And this just looks so much leaner and muscular in comparison, and just looks really, really nice. And I do love the one little throwback to the old Integra you'll see that they have in the front bumper, embossed right under the headlight there, the Integra logo, which is a callback to the ones of the late 90s, early 2000s. And so really cool touch there. But overall, it just looks really good up front. On the sides here, you'll see some unique wheels here for the A-Spec versions. So you get these 18-inch wheels with a darker appearance on them that look really good. I really like this body line that, you know, kicks up by the front wheels here and carries and sweeps up nicely into that hatch. And I think the hatch is an interesting kind of design. You have some hips there towards the back that you don't get on a regular Civic hatch, and you know, the more curvy taillights and everything. It just looks really nice, I think. I think it definitely looks better in person. That back end, that rear three-quarter shot, was the one that was a little iffy for me in pictures, but I think in person it definitely works a lot better. I don't think it's still quite as good looking as the front end, but I think the back end still does look very nice. And you'll see the little black lip spoiler here on the A-Specs, and some dual exhaust tips that are nicely finished off in chrome there in the lower part of the rear bumper. And so overall, you know, I think that it's a really cool looking vehicle and really stands out again for the segment it's playing in. All right, so start up and go for a drive. The Integra here has the new Acura key, which is a really nice key. It's just got some nice metal here on it, and nice and glossy here on the front. Just a little bit of plastic, but I mean, look at all the metal here on the sides. It has a really nice weight to it, and it's nice and small. It's a little bit bigger than Honda's key, but just a tiny bit. It's really a perfect key. I love a nice, small, high quality feeling key. This is about as good as it gets, and so very well done Acura on the new key. But of course, it is keyless access, keyless entry, and push button start in all Integras. So you leave the key in your pocket, hit the engine start button, and it starts right up. Also, if you're curious to hear about the interior in the new Integra, my wife and I just did a full in-depth interior review on this vehicle, so I'll link that above. You can go watch that if you want to hear all our thoughts on this interior. But overall, it's very well done. So there's a lot that is shared with the Civic, but there is a lot that's unique here as well. And overall, it's a really nice place to be, especially for this segment and this vehicle's as-tested price of just under $37,000. All right, so setting off here in the 2023 Integra. So the first thing you notice about this, well, you have a really nice low seating position here, but the dashboard also sits nice and low, so you still have a great view forward. View out of the sides here is really good. Nice thin A-pillar, and nice large side mirrors too. It's a really good view as far as that goes. View out of the back isn't amazing, you know, with that hatch window, but it's not bad. I would say it's just a tiny bit less visibility than maybe a regular sedan. But other things to note here about the Integra. Well, what I love is that Honda and Acura do such a good job with all the driver inputs. So the steering feels really perfect. Not too heavy, not too light, just right. But with the different drive modes, you can also customize to have heavier or lighter steering. And there's even an individual mode here in these upper trims. And so that'll actually give you the ability to change tons of stuff, as you can see there. So you can change, you know, the engine, you can change the dampers, and, you know, all kinds of stuff. And so it's really well done. Another thing that's really well done is the brake and the throttle response. So brakes have a little bit of dead travel, but they start gripping nice and early. And so just a really easy and natural feeling brake pedal to use. You know, it's very easy to be smooth with. with. I really like the way they set that up. Throttle response is also very good here. So part of that is also thanks to the fact that there is a lighter flywheel now. So the flywheel is the light flywheel you got from the new SI. And so a lot of those mechanical improvements do carry over here, just like how you have the rev match downshifting here in the Integra, like you got in the Civic Si here for this new generation. And so, you know, it all feels really easy. So, you know, you have the auto rev match, but if you want to do it yourself, it's also easier to do it yourself thanks to that lighter flywheel, which is really great. Another thing though is the adaptive dampers, which is one thing you get here on these tech package vehicles, and it's something that only the Integra gets. You cannot get adaptive dampers in an Si anymore. And so I'm going to test those out a little bit more to see, you know, how the ride quality varies. But here in the normal mode, they feel really good. Now, if you go for an Integra without the adaptive dampers, Acura has a nice little graphic showing you it's going to be a tiny bit firmer than normal mode here with the adaptive dampers, but not as stiff as what you get with the sport mode with these adaptive dampers. Then the comfort mode is extra soft, and I'm excited to try that out here in a minute as well. But really great you have that adjustability here, and so it means you can set this vehicle up to exactly how you want it to feel. But I'm going to go ahead and put it up into the sport driving mode, and let's turn down onto this back road here and see how it does. Here we go. Good response, pulls nice and strong, and feels really good. So the Integras here have the 1.5 liter turbocharged 4-cylinder engine. It has the same 200 horsepower and 192 pound-feet of torque that the Si does, but the tuning is unique here to the Integra, they say, but it's still very similar in its characteristics, where it has peak torque coming on at 1800 RPM, but peak power doesn't come on until 6000 RPMs. You have a nice high, like 6500 RPM red line here, and it also has a nice little growl to it that sounds really good. It does have exhaust VTEC, just like how the new Civic Si engine has that. And so, you know, it's not as much of a screamer as the old Integras, of course. This 1.5 liter turbo engine got a little more character for this new generation than it had last generation, in my opinion at least. But it still isn't, you know, screaming with character, and, you know, it's not bad though. It's a good punchy motor, and you know, today it's a little bit warmer. It's 80 degrees, so it's not going to feel quite as punchy as I think how it felt in the Si that I had earlier this spring when temperatures were a little bit colder. So you know, with turbo engines, it really is dependent on the temperature as far as how punchy it's going to feel. But this feels pretty good. It doesn't feel quite like the 230 horsepower that was suggested with the Si, that it's kind of underrated from the factory. I'm not sure if the Integra is the same case. I would assume so. Regardless, it gives you about a 7 second 0 to 60 time is what Car and Driver clocked, compared to like a 6.8 second 0 to 60 you get with the Civic Si, which is about 100 or so pounds lighter than this. And that is, by the way, about 0.3 seconds quicker than the Sport Touring hatch, which is the only other manual hatch, you know, Civic-based thing, which does do about 20 less horsepower. You know, 7 seconds, not going to be crazy, awesome, fast or anything, but still a solid performer. But we're coming up some corners I always take here, and let's see how the Integra handles. Still in sport mode here. Feels really good. So one other thing you get here whenever you go for the manual is that you get the limited slip differential up front, which is really great. So you can, you know, put the power down even better. The CVT vehicles, which you can't get a CVT automatic in this as well, those only have a open diff. You get no limited slip diff in those, but it does a good job of putting the power down. I mean, this isn't some kind of horsepower monster, so a limited slip diff probably isn't a huge deal. I didn't really feel a need for it in the Sport Touring hatch with its, you know, 20 less horsepower. I'd be curious to try out one of those CVT Integras just to see how it does. And yeah, I just think it just feels nice and flat. This one's also on all-season tires. All Integras only come with all seasons, versus the Civic, you could actually get summer tires on that. Yeah, it does a good job putting the power down. I like how it's, you know, getting a little bit of wheel spin that it allows here with the traction control and stuff. But it handles really well. So, I mean, thankfully, I actually, the Civic Si I reviewed did have all seasons on it. So it is more of an apples to apples comparison in my experience here. And what I can say is, you know, so the Civic Si doesn't have the adaptive dampers, but I think that the ride is certainly more comfortable in the Integra here, but I think the Si actually has a little bit of a handling edge still. Maybe because of the extra lightness of the Civic Si, maybe just the way the tuning is set up. This just, it feels like it wants to push a tiny bit more than the Si in my experience again. I'm going to have to test it out some more. I mean, it's still very dynamic to be sure. I mean, it's no slouch. It feels very fun in corners. Way more dynamic most likely than most of the other competitors in this segment will feel. This is several hundred pounds lighter than those German luxury competitors, and so that is certainly going to help you out in the handling department as far as that goes. punchy, because this thing really is eager to spin the tires. And I really like also this engine. When you work it and you push it, it has this gratifying nature to it where it feels really good to get in that boost and have that little thing growl away as it pulls and claws at the pavement. It's a fun experience. I really fell in love with the new SI whenever I had that for a week, and I'll be driving this vehicle for a week as well, so we'll see how that grows on me. But one thing I do want to say, that while we're hitting some potholes here in sport mode, yeah, even in sport mode, this feels more comfortable than the SI did, which was a little stiff, admittedly. But even in sport mode here, yeah, I would take this ride over a Civic Si with this new generation. But we'll go ahead and go up into the comfort mode and get it as soft as we can here. Wow, yeah, it really soaks up bumps very nicely. And I had no doubts, though. Honda and Acura do some of the best adaptive damper tuning, in my opinion, because they really, when they go soft, they make it nice and soft, and when they go stiff, they make it, you know, pretty nice and stiff. It's even more extreme in stuff like the Civic Type R. But here in the Integra, it feels really good. But even on this road, you know, which has some minor imperfections and stuff, it really does a good job of smoothing those out, giving you a very refined ride. And then once you upshift here into a higher gear, it's pretty quiet in here too. I don't know if it's the quietest in the segment. I think maybe the Mazda 3 does a better job of being quieter, and I also think that maybe some of the German luxury stuff would be a little bit quieter. I think, like, I had an S3 that certainly seemed to be a little bit more refined as far as road noise and stuff compared to this, but this is still very good, again, for the entry-level luxury segment and the price savings you get of this and the weight savings compared to the Germans. I think that the ride quality and the road noise is totally acceptable, at least here at 45 miles per hour or so. Also, as far as the handling goes, you have McPherson struts up front and independent suspension in the rear. And as far as the brakes go, you have 13.2-inch rotors in the front, 11.1-inch rotors in the rear. And so it all gives you just, very confident and just competent feeling as far as, the handling goes. And just, feels really nice and flat. There's any kind of drama or flex or any kind of uncertainty with the suspension. It just feels really good. Also, the steering's a little quicker here in the A-Spec versions of the Integra. It's 11.52 to 1 versus 11.33 to 1 in the regular versions of the Integra. So a little bit quicker steering. Also, by the way, all Integras are about 5% stiffer than the Civic counterpart. So you do have a little bit of a stiffer body, which should give you better ride control, as well as also giving you slightly better handling, as far as that goes. So that's also a nice little perk here you get of this. But we'll accelerate onto an on-ramp here. I'm still in comfort mode, by the way, so that's how an acceleration sounds in comfort mode. Still sounds good. We'll go back up into the sport mode here. I'm not really getting much sound difference, though. I think in the SI it was definitely more pronounced, with the sound amplification from the speakers being much more aggressive. This seems to have a little less, honestly. I actually kind of prefer, and I kind of miss the extra sound of the Civic. I mean, I could be imagining things here, but it certainly does seem like Civic had a little bit more sound to it, which I appreciated. And now we're out on the highway here in the Integra, and I'm using the adaptive cruise control and the lane keeping assist, which are both standard on Integras, by the way. You get blind spot monitoring as standard. All the safety equipment, automatic emergency braking, all that stuff is standard. Now, the low speed follow that you get with the adaptive cruise system obviously is only on the automatics here, but the manuals, you still have the rest of the adaptive cruise control functionality, which is great that you have, actual adaptive cruise still, even with a manual. And so yeah, it's doing a good job. I'm kind of letting it, do the steering, kind of just hovering my hands here for the most part. And Acura and Honda's system is always one of the best, in my opinion, as far as being reliable and trustworthy. Obviously, you still do have to keep your hands on the wheel, monitor what it's doing, and be paying attention. But it's one of the systems where I haven't found it really letting me down too often. It's pretty rare, honestly, that it ever lets me down, and does a really good job of staying in the lanes, doing enough steering, not bouncing or ping-ponging or acting like it's a drunk driver or something. It really does a good job of giving you confident assistance, which again is kind of rare these days. I've had a lot of these systems with lane keep assist really let me down and really wander all over the place. This one does a really good job of staying locked into those lanes really well, and will definitely help to take a lot of fatigue out of a long highway drive, having that extra assistance. And otherwise, out here on the highway, so 64 miles per hour here, we're cruising at just over 2,500 RPMs, and again, there's some pronounced road noise here. It doesn't feel super luxurious as far as the interior sounds here, but of course this one having this amazing ELS Studio 3D stereo system. You just crank that up and you'll drown out all the road noise easily, and then you just have your awesome tunes you're listening to in surround sound, and you still have the great comfort here of the Integra. But anyway, that's all of my thoughts here on the Integra so far, but thanks to Acura, I will have the Integra for an entire week, so I'm going to drive around all over the place, and I'll come back and give you guys my final real-world fuel economy, as well as my thoughts on the pricing, how it compares to its competition, and anything else that I noticed during my week of driving. So I've been driving the 2023 Integra for a week now, and I've really had a nice time in it. It's really a fun little car. It's a great little family vehicle, you know, carrying around the baby and the wife and strollers, you know, fit great in that hatch and everything. It was a really nice thing to live with. I really did have a fun time in it, and I was able to sample the handling a little bit more, and I definitely wish there was a summer tire option for this car though, because I think that certainly would be appreciated, especially because I really found myself, for some reason, this seems like it wants to spin the tires a little bit more than even the Civic Si that I was reviewing a few months ago back in the spring. But the one thing that I do really love is they do such a good job with this rev match system and with the shifter and everything. It just all feels so engaging, and this motor's kind of peaky with the turbo a little bit, so it really is fun to, you know, it really wants to fling itself up, you know, over 4,000 RPMs really quickly and easily. So it's really fun to really play with that boosty nature of this engine. And obviously, again, it's still not going to rip your head off with power or anything, but it's enough power to have fun with. And you know, there's a couple things I did observe here during my week though. The first is that for me, I have to drive in sport mode. Either that or the individual mode where everything else is turned up into sport aside from the suspension. I would kind of put in that individual mode and have the software set up for the suspension for whenever I was driving around the family or something and I wanted to smooth out the ride. But whenever I'm on my own, sport mode was the way to go. It's not really that stiff, so even suspension wise, I think it's totally fine. Even if you just drove around in sport mode all the time, even with people that, you know, didn't like harsh rides, I don't think anyone would be upset about the ride in this, even in sport mode. So it's very mod with the damper tuning as far as, you know, the sport mode goes, at least. I think they could honestly make it even a little more aggressive. Maybe that's what the, you know, eventual Type S version will do down the road. But as it was, you know, I just, you know, still had a lot of fun whenever it was in sport mode especially. I also really like driving around with the windows down and the moonroof open and hearing the turbo sounds and even actually a little bit of exhaust burble. I was kind of shocked, but driving around whenever there's no one else around and to make extra noise or anything, just listening to nothing but this engine exhaust, you actually do get a very, very mild amount of burble out of this exhaust on the overrun whenever you lift your foot off the gas. And it's really a nice little sound. I honestly wish there was more of it. I think the aftermarket will obviously tap into that. I'm excited to hear, you know, how some aftermarket exhaust will sound here on the Integra, but you know, there's some potential there, I think, and so that was kind of cool to have that. But you know, it's a really nice, comfortable cruiser. You know, again, having the moonroof is great, having the nice extra comfort here, the better sound system of the Integra, all those things are very, very nice. And so I'll get into pricing in a second here, but first I want to talk about fuel economy. So that was one other thing that I actually was pretty impressed with. So over my, I drove with this vehicle 167 miles here this week, and during that amount of driving, my fuel economy is in 27.7 mpg, and that even includes about, you know, 20 minutes or so to film the interior view, just sitting in a parking lot with this engine idling with the air conditioning going. So honestly, I was thinking about a half mpg even higher than this before that. So I'm saying, you know, basically I was getting, you know, over 28 mpg in this vehicle, and that's really impressive considering these manual ones are rated at 26 mpg in the city, 36 on the highway, and 30 combined. And you do get a few mpg better for the CVT version if you are someone who, you know, wants to go for the best fuel economy possible in the Integra. You know, that is going to be the way you're going to get that, is, you know, with that CVT. But so I was impressed because typically, you know, whenever I have a press vehicle and I'm doing my normal amount of driving, I usually get like 1 to 2 mpg less than the city rating, and I'm getting, you know, like 2 mpg better than the city rating. So I didn't really do much more highway driving. I did a few extra miles of highway driving, but not enough to really, you know, make the average go up by 2 mpg or anything. So I'm really impressed. And now this is a theme I've been noticing, because the Civic Si also overperformed its EPA estimates, and I was very impressed with that fuel economy as well. I guess I should have expected it considering how well the Si does, but you know, it's just really impressive. This is definitely easily overperforming those EPA estimates. And so in these times of high gas prices, that is something that is, I think, certainly more and more important these days, and certainly something I wanted to, you know, point out. But the last thing to mention here is the pricing in the Integras and how it compares to its competition. So the Integras start at $31,895, including destination. And then this one, as tested, is about $36,895. So, right under 37 grand, including destination, for this loaded up tech package with the manual. And that's the only way you can get the manual, is with the A-Spec tech package like this one. So this isn't an unfamiliar strategy. Mazda does the same thing with the Mazda3, which I'll get back to that car in a minute. But they do the same thing where the manual is only available in that fully loaded top hatch. That's the only way you can get it. And so I guess they assume that, people that are going for the manual these days are going to want all the bells and whistles. I don't agree. I think that there's a lot of people who do still want, a base model kind of vehicle with a manual, especially when you're talking about something that has as much standard equipment as the Integra does here. But regardless, that's the way they're doing it. So as it sits, you're paying about $8,000 or $9,000 more than a Civic Si. And I know that's not really what Acura is, competing with, but I know a lot of people are cross-shopping this. Is it worth the upcharge over an Si? And that's going to come down to, how badly you want the upgrades of the Integra here. The heated seats, the nicer, seats, and the better stereo, and all those things. There are some nice improvements here. But are those improvements worth, $8,000 extra or so, considering you have the same performance, the same engine, the same interior space as well, all those types of things. And yes, you get the hatchback versatility, but, that's another thing that, if you really must have a hatch, there is also the Civic Sport Touring hatch, which you can get, which, yes, you lose 20 horsepower in the limited slip diff, but it's a very similar, fun, enjoyable experience, great shifter in that car too and stuff. And so it's tough. So, again, it's going to come down to personal preference, but for anyone, very briefly, who cares about my personal opinion, I personally would rather have an Si and save the $8,000. I don't think this is $8,000 more fun than an Si, certainly not. It's basically the same fun as an Si. And I think the luxury stuff is nice. I love loaded up luxury vehicles, but I also think that the new Si has basically the same nice interior, aside from having cloth seats. Not a big deal. It's still a bummer that the Si got rid of the heated seats and the adaptive suspension, in this new generation version. But, since these adaptive dampers, they're certainly a nice feature. If you test drive an Si and you're like, oh, the ride's a little rough, hop in this, you'll probably be much happier. Again, is that worth $8,000 extra? Just to me, the ride was fine in the Si and stuff, so for my money, I would just stick with the Si. But, it's that, again, well, that would come down to, what you prefer and, how much you value the things the Integra offers. But, the main competitors that Acura is going after here are the German competitors, the Audi A3, Mercedes CLA, and then the BMW 228i Gran Coupe. And so, when you compare it to those three, it compares very favorably. The things that the Germans have over this is they have more power, they have faster 0 to 60 times and all that stuff. They also have real automatic transmissions with real gears, versus the automatic in this being a CVT, which has simulated gears. And the CVT here that Honda uses in its newest products, it's a pretty good CVT, but it still isn't as good as a normal, just average automatic that people are used to, having those actual gears and stuff. And a lot of the Germans use really good automatics as well. So I think that they don't offer manuals either, so it's going to come down to where you fall as far as what you're looking for here. If you're wanting a manual, this is the only game in town as far as luxury stuff is concerned. But also those Germans, other things to mention here is, again, they're much more expensive. $6,000 to $8,000, I think, is what I saw, more expensive. And on top of the extra price, you also get extra weight, with them being heavier by 300 to 400 pounds on average. And so they're not going to be quite as sharp with their handling. And I also think that some of them actually manage to feel a little cheaper. Like, I think a Mercedes CLA feels a little cheaper inside. The plastics are squeakier. And I think this feels a little more solid than some of those actually do. The A3, I think, is pretty top-notch as far as its interior, but the Mercedes just and the BMW I don't have any experience with, unfortunately, so I can't weigh in on how that is. But I will say that is a very tight interior compared to this. This also has the biggest back seat of those other vehicles. It's way more back seat space, way more cargo space with a hatch. None of the others offer a hatch here in the States, and so you have some very nice improvements there with that. And so if it was just those competitors, I'd say, yeah, it's pretty easy to see the Integra has a lot of advantages to it. But there's one big problem, and that is the Mazda 3 hatch. The Mazda 3 hatch is the same thing where, you know, yes, Mazda is not technically a luxury brand, but if you've been in any kind of modern Mazda in the past, you know, couple of years here, you'll know they're going for a premium brand as far as their experience on the inside. They're very luxurious interiors. They're the nicest interiors in their class, basically across the board. When you sit in a Mazda 3, a loaded Mazda 3 hatchback, and then you sit in this, I think the Mazda 3 actually feels a little nicer than this interior in some areas. And the Mazda 3, the disclaimer with that is it does have a slightly smaller back seat, and the hatch isn't as big as it is here in this. But it is still a decent sized hatch. The back seat is still, you know, average for the segment. It's not incredibly small, but this definitely has more space. But aside from the space thing, the Mazda, I think, actually, you know, has a pretty nice interior. Now, you don't have a touchscreen in the Mazda. That's another big issue, and that honestly would be probably a decent justification still just to go for the Integra over the Mazda. But the thing with the Mazda that really makes you stop and think is the pricing of that. With a manual transmission and with that, you know, fully loaded Mazda 3 hatch, you can get one of those for just over $30,000. And yes, the motor has less power. You're doing, I think it's like 14 less horsepower than this engine, because there's no turbo on that, and it's just a bigger, you know, 2.5 liter engine instead in that Mazda. But I mean, 14 horsepower, but you're saving, again, you know, almost $7,000 going for that Mazda. If you don't need the most amount of space possible and you don't need 14 more horsepower, the Mazda 3 really makes a strong case for itself. Unfortunately, I've only had about a quick 15-minute drive in a Mazda 3 with a manual for the front-wheel drive hatch, so I don't have a ton of experience as far as, you know, I do think this probably will handle a little bit better than those do, because those have slightly skinnier 225 wide tires versus the 235s on here. And, you know, I think that maybe the Hondas are set up a little bit to be a little bit of a better handler than the Mazda in some ways. But the other thing is, if you don't have to have a manual transmission, you can get a turbo all-wheel drive Mazda 3 hatch, and those are $33,500 with 250 horsepower and 320 pound-feet of torque. That's like 130 more pound-feet of torque than this thing. I mean, it will absolutely blow the doors off of this Integra, and it's cheaper than this by several $1,000s. So again, it's going to come down to where you fall. You know, if you're someone who must have a manual and, you know, you want to have, you know, a little bit of better handling characteristics, I can certainly see, again, no shame in going for the Integra here. But, you know, it's just that Mazda is really going to be, you know, the biggest problem, I think, for the Integra, in my opinion, when people are cross-shopping these vehicles. But anyway, that's about all of my thoughts here on the Integra. Overall, though, I still, like I said, I love it. I think if you want, you know, a nicer Civic Si hatch, this still lives up to that. That's essentially what this was going to be, you know, from the get-go, and that's what it is. You know, it's a nicer Civic Si hatch, and there's nothing wrong with that. That's what Integras have always been throughout history, and you know, this sticks with tradition. And there's also probably a good value there for someone who's always wanted an automatic Civic Si. You know, now those people have the option of getting an Integra with the CVT. Sure, it's not the greatest automatic, you know, choice, but at least you now have, you know, the SI powertrain combined with an automatic transmission in a really nice premium package. And, you know, if you don't need the manual, then you can go for one of the lower trim packages, do without a few features, and, you know, come out with a vehicle, you know, in the low $30,000 range that is essentially just a nicer, more luxurious automatic SI. And so, you know, as that angle, you know, goes, I think it's also, you know, pretty compelling as well. You know, I wish the pricing would have come in, you know, a few $1,000s less, but as it is, it's still a really fun vehicle on its own. You know, it has some of the best tech in its segment. It has, you know, like I said, so many advantages, and I really do like the Integra a lot, as long as the price doesn't scare you off. So anyway, that's all of my thoughts. Let me know your thoughts on the Integra in the comments below. Huge thanks to Acura for providing me here with the Integra to review for you guys today. And yeah, thank you all very much for watching. I'll see you on the next one. Take care.